Good morning, Central Florida, and welcome to another episode of the DeWitt Law Review right here on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580. I'm attorney Mo DeWitt, and this morning we are joined by a very special guest, attorney Melissa Vickers, who is running for public defender in the 9th Judicial Circuit, which is Orange and Osceola County. So, Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And so, just to kind of jump into it, people obviously a lot of times know what the public defender's office does, but can you kind of inform them sort of what their role is, in the judicial system?
Sure. So when you get arrested for a crime and cannot hire your own lawyer, the public defender's office will be appointed to represent you if you qualify, and will go to court and represent you. When people are Baker Acted and can't afford to hire their own lawyer to represent them under a Baker Act, which is a mental, safety involuntary commitment.
Harm to yourself or others,
right.
They can do a 72-hour hold essentially and have you evaluated, right?
Right. And so if you want an attorney to represent you, either you want to get out of that hold or you want to stay in on the hold or go somewhere else on the hold, you need representation. And so we also do that as well.
Okay. And so, I know this, but, just for our listeners, kind of what's your background as far as I know right now you're a criminal defense attorney, correct?
Correct.
But you have extensive history with the public defender's office. Can you kind of just educate our listeners about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So I was a public defender for 21 years as an attorney. I worked for the Jacksonville Public Defender's Office throughout college.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, interviewing. My first job, summers and Christmas holidays from college would be I would go to the jail and interview clients all day and then bring back the interview sheets to the attorneys at the end of the day. So I did that throughout college. And then I was a attorney public defender in Fort Lauderdale for a few years, and then I moved up to Orlando and I was a public defender here for 18 years.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know if listeners know this, but I actually started at the public defender's office while you were there. I don't think we ever worked together, but we certainly saw each other quite every day. And so, what kind of motivated you to pursue? Obviously, you're very passionate about criminal defense. You've been doing it your entire career, I think. So what kind of motivated you to pursue that avenue of the law? That area of the law, I should say.
I think that the thought of people being incarcerated, the thought of people being accused of crimes, sometimes they didn't necessarily commit, sometimes they didn't commit the crime that they're accused of. Maybe it's something different, lesser.
Right, overcharged, things
overcharged,
like that.
Right. So the thought of people being in that position and not knowing how to protect or defend themselves struck a nerve with me. And so I felt that I have a voice. I, thank God, have the knowledge and the education to go in and be a voice for them. And so that's kind of what started me out.
And anyone who's dealt with the legal system, I think, knows how scary it really can be. Whether it's, obviously when you're facing potentially losing your freedom, it's probably the scariest area of the law. But, even dealing with things like, losing your children or, fighting in a divorce, if you haven't done it before, if you don't know how to navigate it, really it's nearly impossible to do correctly on your own. People can represent themselves, but it's never really a good idea. And so, from a constitutional perspective, everybody has a constitutional right to a defense, and that's really why the public defender's office is so important. And, it's kind of crazy, and I'm sure you know this history better than I do. Up until, 60 years ago or something, there wasn't even a right to have an attorney if you were accused of a crime.
Right.
And so, people would go in there, and I've had, retired judges and people tell me kind of crazy stories of, the sheriff would walk out and say, okay, if you're guilty, go to this side of the room. If you're not guilty, go to this side of the room. And that's just how things operated, which, put a lot of people in jail for probably a long time that really maybe shouldn't have been there or shouldn't have been on those charges.
Yes, very much so. Gideon versus Wainwright was the case that granted the right to have an attorney represent you if you couldn't afford one. And Gideon was accused of stealing money from a pool hall and tried to represent himself and lost, and hand wrote the brief to the Supreme Court saying, I should have had a lawyer, and had I had one, I would have won. So that's what started it all.
It's pretty amazing that somebody on their own was able to do that. Because like I said, nearly impossible to do. And, still today, you're not required to have an attorney, and people still try to represent themselves. But there's a huge benefit to having an attorney, in my opinion. And especially when you're faced with criminal charges, you have to know your rights. And people who don't just for lack of a better term, I think they can often get railroaded by the system. I mean, the system can really be unfair if you don't know what you're doing. And so, I mean, how do you kind of see the public defender's office and their role in ensuring, fair and equal representation for people?
So I think the most important thing is speaking out. So if you have a client, race, sex, religion, whatever the issue is, and you feel that they're not being treated fairly as another person would, speak out, say it. Judge, Mr. Prosecutor, this is my client. He's a black male. He's a Hispanic male.
Whatever.
Yeah, right. Whatever the situation is, he's a gay male. You're not treating him fairly because of this, and this, and that's not right. You've got this client over here who was just given this, and this. This is not fair. So I think just speaking it and saying it and making everybody aware of it is the first step.
Yeah, and I think, oftentimes when someone's charged with a crime, and they're innocent until proven guilty, obviously, but there are a lot of biases in the system, and people assume that, hey, they were charged, so they must be guilty, right? So we, as a criminal defense lawyer, you have to fight against that because it's the constitutional presumption is the exact opposite.
Right.
So, oftentimes it's easy for people to try to dismiss others, I think, when they're charged with a crime. And like you said, I mean, a lot of times maybe they committed a crime, but maybe they didn't commit the crime they're charged with. And, overcharging and kind of, they're still human beings. And trying,
right.
And, ultimately, people deserve a second chance. And if people out there have been faced with crimes, they know it's a scary system, and it can be very, very difficult to navigate. So you have extensive history with the public defender's office. And so for the listeners out there who don't know, kind of on a daily basis, there's obviously the main public defender, but there's a lot of attorneys who work there. And so kind of what's their role on a daily basis in the judicial system, and kind of how do they assist, people who are accused of crimes?
So their main role is to represent people in court accused of crimes or in Baker Act proceedings. So,
right.
You're meeting with clients, you're going to court, you're doing trials, you're doing research, you're writing motions, you're going to the jail for your clients that are stuck in jail and can't get out. But it's the premise is defending these clients and doing everything you can to defend them. What's interesting is in our system, it's really not guilt or innocence. You watch
right.
TV and the movies and you think it's all about did they do it or did they not? But if you really look at the jury instructions, it's did the state prove the case?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt. If they did, you should find them guilty. If they didn't, you should find them not guilty. So it's really about can the state prove the case? And from the defense side, it's about either chipping away at the state's case so that they cannot prove it, or pointing out to the judge or the jury things that the state has not proven and cannot prove in order to be successful for the client.
Yeah, and that's where the fun as an attorney can sometimes come in, because you're absolutely right. The state has the burden of proof in these cases. And so when they charge somebody with something, they have to be able to prove it to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they can't, then the person is found not guilty and can kind of move on with their life, hopefully.
Yes.
And so that's kind of what the lawyers who work at the public defender's office do. And, oftentimes people kind of get a bad rap for being a public defender, as we've both seen over the years. But there's some really talented people who work there and work very hard and are, extraordinarily experienced in criminal defense law. I mean, I think the best attorneys around either came out of there or work there, which is really a testament to the office. But but then there's the main public defender. And so how does the public defenders, what does their job kind of entail on a daily basis? What's their role?
So as the elected public defender, the role is to essentially be the administrator of the office. So
Okay.
that means everything. We don't just have attorneys. We have investigators. We have paralegals. We have social workers. We
Right.
have secretaries. We have receptionists. We have lots of different people who work there. So it's administration duties of the office, but also making sure that everybody has the tools and the training that they have to do their job effectively.
And so that you bring up a good point too. We didn't really go into this, but the public defender's office is a lot more than just attorneys, and they offer a lot more services. I mean, it is the largest criminal defense firm in this area, if you wanted to call it that, because they have by far the most attorneys, but they also have a whole slew of other resources that they utilize, as part of their job, in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into some of the other areas where they help people, and how you mentioned investigators and social workers, how those roles kind of intertwine with what the public defender's office does?
Sure. So investigators obviously are there to assist the attorneys with the cases. They can go out and investigate. They can question witnesses, find witnesses. We had one time where we had a case where the client was telling us, go find so-and-so. He hangs out under I-4 at this spot. And that's a hard ask, but the investigator was actually able to track the person down and found him, and it made a huge difference in the case.
Yeah, I mean, which is incredible because, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove in court, so to speak, and on the prosecution side. But on the defense side, if you have a defense and you can't find the person to testify to it, you may not be able to bring the defense up in court.
Exactly.
And so, having those investigators, having those resources, even things like just going and taking photos and all that kind of stuff, showing, which can help with, timelines and all these things that you see on television.
Yes.
There's a lot more that goes into it behind the scenes to actually, build the defense to be able to show it to the jury. It's not just the attorney out there. They have a whole team behind them that really helps.
Right. And then social services helps a lot, especially with people with mental health issues and substance abuse issues. We can help find placement. We can, if they need a program, we can help them fill out the applications and coordinate with the program to try to get them into a program, dual diagnosis programs for people who are mentally ill and have substance abuse. We can help find placements. We can help, get their application for Social Security filled out so they can get their Social Security back when they get out of jail. There's many things that our office does just besides going to court and representing the person.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a full service operation. I mean, it is quite the operation. And, obviously you're running to be the elected public defender. And so, we went over your experience a little bit, and obviously you have extensive experience in the criminal defense world as well as the public defender's office. But can you kind of tell our listeners why you believe you would be a good fit for the job as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the absolute best qualified candidate. I was in management at the public defenders for,
A long time.
Like 14 years. I ended my career there. I was the chief assistant. So I have experience in managing every aspect of the office. I also, based on my experiences in working in different public defender offices, before I became a lawyer, I worked in 4 different public defender offices in various capacities. So I know what it's like to be an intake person. I know what it's like to be a jail interviewer. I know what it's like to work in investigations. I worked there part-time during college. I know what it's like to be a legal secretary. I know what it's like to be a paralegal. So I know each of the jobs. I have the experience. I have the knowledge. I think I have the passion for it. This is absolutely what I want to do with my life. Yeah. And I'm ready to go.
Very nice. And, and you bring up a good point. You've done every job within the building, basically. So you know how it runs, what needs to be done. And you're certainly passionate about it, or you wouldn't have done it for this long, because as you know, there's a lot of people go through the public defender's office as attorneys. I think it's a great place for attorneys to start because you get a lot of great experience. But if you're not passionate about it, they don't stay in the field very long.
Right.
We are up against another break, but we will be right back. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580.
It would have been a second later. It would have been a lot worse. That morning, I was heading into work, and as I'm going through the green light, here he comes through the red light, and we met in the middle. The insurance company initially wouldn't believe the story that I had a witness that saw the entire thing, so they tried to reverse, saying that I ran the red light, I hit their person. Mo and his people took care of that, got them to reverse that decision, which was fantastic because that was really stressing me out. I would definitely recommend anyone using an attorney use Mo DeWitt. I even texted him during his vacation and he texted me back, which was amazing. Not too many lawyers in and around Orlando definitely will give you that time. Injured on the go, just call Mo DeWitt. He's fantastic.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review right here on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580. I am attorney Mo DeWitt, and joining me today is attorney Melissa Vickers, who is running as the running for public defender, the elected public defender here in the 9th Judicial Circuit for Orange and Osceola County. Melissa, thank you so much for being on the show today and joining us and informing our listeners a lot about what the Public Defender's Office does and their role in the community. And one of the things that we talk about on this show a lot are new laws that are coming out, because there have been a lot of legislative changes over the last year, not only in the criminal defense or for criminal defense and new statutes, but all over the place. And one of the things that we were kind of talking about that the Public Defender's Office is faced with doing is when a new law gets passed, people may be arrested under that new law, and it's kind of new territory. And one of the things we were sort of talking about is how does the Public Defender's Office handle those cases? Because they're the ones who kind of, for lack of a better term, sometimes have to clean up the mess of the legislature when they may pass a law that's not real clear or not being enforced properly or whatever it may be.
So first of all, is being informed about the laws and the nuances and the updates in the laws as quickly as possible. So that's number one. And
Right.
number two is developing a strategic plan in order to defend our clients against these laws. So for example, when the new firearm law came out in July 1st of 2023, making it legal for people now to carry a firearm concealed if they meet the certain criteria,
Right.
there are still people being arrested walking around or in their car having a concealed firearm who are still being arrested. So you have to know, okay, I need to do a motion to dismiss. I know the case law. I know what the legal arguments are. I need to go in and make sure that I file this, that the judge hears it, and that it gets granted so that the person is not held accountable for something that they didn't do that was wrong.
And just for our listeners' purposes, before you had to have a license to carry a concealed weapon, correct?
Correct.
And so now that's no longer the case.
Correct.
But people are still being arrested for that?
Sometimes, yeah.
And again, I guess it's really about being informed. I'm assuming that the law enforcement just isn't up to date on the laws. Is that what's going on, or is there something more there?
Sometimes, or it can be subjective, where they thought, oh, well, I thought the firearm was in plain view, or I thought it was concealed. So it's making the argument of, no, it's not plain view, it's really concealed. No matter how absurd it sounds, that you can have a concealed weapon, but you can't have an open carry weapon, which is a plain view weapon. So it's making the nuanced argument of, no, it wasn't in plain view, it was concealed, and it's a legal right to carry a concealed firearm if they meet the criteria.
Okay, so go back through what the standard is now for me.
So you are allowed to carry a concealed firearm. You cannot open carry a firearm. So you can't have it sitting in your lap. You can't have it out in the open. You can't have it on a holster on your waist, which is visible. But you can carry it concealed if you meet the certain criteria. So, for example, if you haven't been convicted of a felony before, if you do not have a substance abuse problem, if you have not been committed to a mental health facility, if you're over the age of 21. So it's all of if you meet the criteria for those things, then anyone in Florida can carry a concealed firearm at this point.
And so I guess there's still some dispute, though, like you said, where open carry versus concealed, and it could be at the officers or the prosecutor's discretion as to what the situation is, and that's where the Public Defender's Office may come in and have to make these arguments that haven't been made before because the law changed.
Correct.
Interesting. And so as a person who practices criminal defense, and obviously, again, you're running to be the public defender for the Ninth Judicial Circuit, how do you stay up to date with these laws and legislative changes and that stuff?
So it's a lot of reading and research. There is in the criminal defense community, through the Florida Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, they send out a case law update weekly. And so you read that updates. You search the legislative websites to see what laws are up. You certainly want to make yourself aware of what laws have passed. And then I know you put that out to others. So when I'm the public defender, we will have updates, the next day of, look, this law changed, this law passed. We got to get on top of this. This is what it is now. Go get it done.
Yeah, because you have to stay informed. You have to stay on top of these things. And I know you've been very involved with the Central Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers for a number of years. And so, as overseeing the Public Defender's Office, how many attorneys are there approximately?
About 120.
Yeah, so a good amount of attorneys, and I assume part of your job is to make sure that they're informed on these new legislative changes that are coming out, to make sure that they know how to properly handle those cases. So I think that experience, that information is certainly imperative, so that they can do their job, effectively for the clients there.
Yes.
the interesting stuff, we're always curious and following the new legislative changes that are going on in Florida. That's one of the things this show is about. This year's been a little crazy for that, which probably makes more work for the public defender's office, I'm sure. We are up against another break, but we will be right back. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580.
About 1 year ago, I got a car accident. I'm so panicked, I don't know what to do. And then I asked my son, so he said, oh, call the mall. I said, okay, I call. And then after that, so everything that mall take care of. So everybody need a lawyer, call the mall. It's the best in Orlando. Injured, let it go, just more, okay? The best. Everything you have problem, you just call. My experience with Durham Home is 100% great, 110% great, real great. The team, Casey and Jennifer, they are good. Yeah, real good. Call more. Everything handled. Perfect. Thank you.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580 WDBO. I'm attorney Mo DeWitt, and joining me this morning is again attorney Melissa Vickers, who is running for public defender in the 9th Judicial Circuit for Orange and Osceola County. Melissa, again, thank you so much for being on the show, for educating our listeners. And, what you're running for and what you do for a living is very interesting, in my opinion. But I'm also kind of a legal nerd, so maybe that's why. Overseeing the public defender's office is a big job, obviously. And you're running for public defender of Orange and Osceola County, like I said. And so if you are elected, can you discuss some of the policy changes or initiatives that you would advocate for?
Sure. Thank you again for having me. This has been a lot of fun this morning. So some of the changes I would make, the big two are going to be customer service for the clients, making sure that clients have access to the attorneys, make sure that phone calls are returned within 24 hours, emails are returned, texts are returned, things like that. So access to the attorneys and customer service. And then my other big one is training. I feel that the attorneys have to be trained on practical things that you go into court and you need to perform your job with. So we're going to bring back a lot of practical training to the job. As far as the criminal justice system goes, there's obviously a lot that needs to be fixed.
Of course, yeah.
And, a large part of the job and being the administrator of the office is being able to go to these other criminal justice partners and, talk to them and sit down. So for example, I met with Sheriff Mina yesterday from Orange County Sheriff's Office talking about issues that are important between his organization and the public defender's office and what can we do to better them and make things easier for everybody. So there's things like that you want to be able to go to the chief judge and talk to them. You want to be able to go to the state attorney and talk to them. So for example, with the state attorney's office right now for pretrial diversion, it's taking 2 months or longer to get a client from the court system over to pretrial diversion.
And can you tell our listeners what pretrial diversion is?
So pretrial diversion is a program that's normally for first-time offenders who have lower-level crimes and nonviolent lower things. And they go through a program depending on how serious the crime is. It could be usually 6 months, a year, where they have to pay back restitution. They have to do community service hours. They have to do a class. So if it's a theft charge, they do a theft class. If it's some type of other charge, or there'll be a behavioral modification class. So things like that they have to do. And then once they complete all of those conditions, then they graduate from the program and the charges get dropped. So it's really an opportunity to give people a second chance to get back up there, not have their record tarnished. They can go on to
because everybody makes mistakes. And,
everybody makes mistakes.
And hopefully you learn from those mistakes. And that's kind of the point of the program, I think.
Exactly. That's the whole point of the program. But the problem is that people are so delayed in getting into the program that they're just sitting there for months twiddling their thumbs because they can't start community service until they get in the program. They can't start the class till they get in the program.
Right.
I want to be able to start the class right away. I want to be able to start the community service hours right away. And if there's administrative issues and backlog of getting people into pretrial diversion, let's get those solved. Let's get that faster, get people in and out of the program and on with their lives. The majority of people who go through pretrial diversion never come back through the system again.
Right. So it's working.
I mean, it's totally working.
Yeah.
100% it's working. But it's just delaying things by 2 to 3 months when we can't get them into the program for so long.
Right.
So that's a good example of being able to call the state attorney and say, hey, let's sit down. Let's talk about this. What can we do to make this faster? Give me some options for community service that my clients can start doing now.
Yeah, and that's one thing I don't think we really see a lot is sort of the behind the scenes, inside baseball, so to speak.
Yes.
You assume that the public defender is enemies with the sheriff or the state attorney's office or the judges, and that's really not the case. I mean, you have to be able to work together because you're all in the fight together, but also that's how the system works more efficiently for everybody.
Right. You can be adversaries in the courtroom,
Right.
but be respectful and communicate with each other outside the courtroom. And you really need those relationships to be able to administer justice swiftly and efficiently, because without that, it doesn't work and it's just chaotic.
Absolutely. And, the example you gave about the pretrial diversion, if somebody's been arrested and accused of a crime, it doesn't really benefit anybody to have them sitting there for months, not being able to move on with their life. I mean, your life's basically put on pause, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing if they're going to get into the program. They probably want to, if they've made a mistake, they probably want to start taking action to correct the path they were on. And
For example, like teachers and nurses, if you get arrested, just getting arrested before charges are filed, your teaching license, they suspend you. They put you in a desk job or they suspend you. If you're a nurse, they suspend your nursing license until that's done. So if you're a nurse or a teacher or have a job where that's important and you have a license and you need it to work, you're out of a job. You can't work until this gets resolved. So the faster we can get this resolved, the faster people can get back to their lives, back to working, back to being productive, back to making sure they can pay their bills and on with their lives.
Yeah, which is a betterment for all of society, really. I mean, you don't want people who are sitting around not able to work and then, they have to go on state assistance or things like that. And just their whole life can kind of be ruined by this one thing because they can't work. They can't support their family.
Right. And it clogs up the system. I mean, you really need to clear out the lower level crimes so you can spend the time and the energy on the more serious crimes, on the more violent crimes, on things like that need more attention. You've got somebody with a petty theft. Maybe this is their first time. They made a mistake. They're very sorry for it. They're doing 100 community service hours to, do penance for it, so to speak. They're doing the theft class. They're aware of the situation. Let's get them through that program. Let's get their charges dropped and let's get them back to society and back to being productive and working and making money.
Well, and I think that's a great point too, because oftentimes in the news, obviously we hear about the more serious crimes, but there can be a huge backlog in the system. And you're right. It really comes from the not so serious crimes.
Right.
And that, that really anyone could have been charged with. And most of our listeners probably know somebody who was charged with something like that. And that's what, clogs the system. And it doesn't benefit anybody because then you can't spend the time you need on the more serious crimes on all sides of the judicial system, not just from the defending side, but from the prosecuting side and, from the judge's side as well. I mean, they only have so many days, so many hours to have trials in the courtroom. So when you have all these other crimes backlogging the system, it makes things take a lot longer. And I'm sure it costs the taxpayers and the government a lot more money.
Yes, it can.
So you've been a criminal defense lawyer for a long time. You've worked in the public defender's office, and you have good relationships with a lot of these people, it seems like.
I do.
And you mentioned you were speaking with Sheriff Mina the other day, who's obviously the sheriff of Orange County. And, again, that may be something that people don't really consider. You might think the public defender and the sheriff are adversaries, but and they are in the courtroom sometimes, but in many ways they have to work together to, like you said, efficiently have an efficient justice system overall.
Absolutely. There needs to be a mutual respect amongst the heads of the agencies.
Yeah.
And I think that in the past, when I was working at the public defender's office, I would attend in my management capabilities, attend many of the meetings where you have the chief judge, you have the sheriff, you have the chief of police, you have the state attorney's office, you have court administrators there, you have the juvenile justice people there.
Yeah.
You have all of those people in a room and you're able to talk. And so you're able to create those relationships, create the mutual respect that you have. But then you're also able to put that aside when you go to the courtroom and cross-examine a police officer on the stand or do what you need to do to do your job to protect your client.
But you still have the ability to solve problems.
Yes.
I mean, if a simple misdemeanor case is taking a year or two to get through the system, that's a problem that doesn't benefit anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so trying to make that more efficient. And, one thing I think people might be interested in knowing is, how is the public defender's office funded and how does that work? And, what would your role as public defender be in kind of helping getting it funded?
Sure. So we are funded through the state of Florida. Although we are an independent agency, so the state of Florida, even though we're funded by them, does not have, necessarily oversight into our day-to-day operations and how we we do things and how we defend our clients.
Right.
Because a lot of times the people say, oh, you're paid by the state, so you must work for them.
Right.
While we do get paid by the state, we certainly do not work with them, and we are an independent agency. The other way we are funded is everybody who fills out an application to have a public defender, there's a $50 application fee. So we get a portion of that. And then at the end of the case, if the client's able to pay, they'll put what's called a public defender lien, and we'll ask for money, depending on if it's a misdemeanor, if it's a felony, how much money we're going to ask for, but we'll ask for the client to contribute something to their defense. Whereas on a misdemeanor case, you might ask for a $100 public defender lien,
Right.
whereas a private attorney might charge $3,500.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
Right. And so if you just can't afford the private attorney and need the public defender, but we're still going to ask you to contribute something because we still, have to run the office.
Right.
We still need money. There's also certain grants you can apply for, as far as, like criminal justice grants that you can get that would go for different programs in the office, services that we can provide for clients in the office.
And I think the public defender's office here is one of the largest in the state, maybe the second behind Miami.
We're the third.
The third?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's a very busy office,
Yes.
obviously. If you've seen the courthouse downtown, a lot of attorneys from the public defender's office in there. But you don't just deal in the courthouse downtown. You also deal, in the juvenile courthouse and deal with a lot of vulnerable populations, juveniles, people with mental health issues, drug addiction. As public defender, what's kind of your policy on dealing with that? How would you try to improve those systems and get those people the help they need?
So the goal is to have people who are best suited for those positions to handle those cases. So for example, we have people who love to do juvenile work. They
Right.
like to represent
Yeah.
kids. They're passionate about it. They love it. They perhaps did a juvenile clinic in law school. Some of them are board certified now in juvenile law. Those are the people that are going to represent our kids. We're going to train the people to represent the kids because there's special issues that you have and laws and rules when it comes to representing kids. And
Yeah.
you need to be well-versed and educated. And those are the people that represent the kids. Same for mental health. We have people who are passionate. We had an attorney that came through that used to be a caseworker at Aspire Health who worked with mentally ill clients all the time, went to law school. She's the perfect person
Right.
to work with in our mental health division.
Because both of those are very unique areas of
Yes.
the law. When we say, juvenile court, it's not what you see on television.
No.
There's not juries
Right.
typically, unless they're, charged as an adult. And it's a separate courthouse completely. So it's
Right.
really handled very differently. And I think the purpose of it is very different as
Yes.
well. So you're right. You want people who are passionate with working with children. Just like, if you were looking for a school for your child, you don't want somebody who's the teacher who hates their job because
Right.
they're not going to be as good at it. So you want people who are passionate about that. And I think sometimes those people can be hard to find, but when you find them,
Yes.
and they are out there. And I know,
Yes.
I know a lot of a lot of the people in town who are passionate about those
Yes.
areas. It's important to keep them and make sure they're doing what they love to do.
Absolutely. It's very important to have stability. It's very important to have knowledge, education, training, experience when you're dealing with kids, when you're dealing with mentally ill clients, when you're dealing with the very serious crimes, obviously death penalty cases, all of that. It's very, very important.
And so how do they deal with kind of the mental health issues? Because I know that's a whole other area.
Yeah. So depending on if it's what the issue is and
Right.
what the mental health issues are, there's a mental health court that we can divert clients to sometimes depending on the charges. There's also competency issues. If somebody maybe is not competent to stand trial, then we go and we deal with that. If somebody might have been insane at the time when they committed their offense, we go with that. So it's a challenge of working with experts, doctors, finding out what the issue is with the client, getting records, diagnosis, things like that, and then presenting it to the court in the right way. And you have to know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you can really mess up these people's lives. And so it's very, very important that you're educated, you're trained on mental health issues and the law, because the law is confusing and not a lot of people pay attention to it.
Yeah.
That was one of my kind of passion projects when I was a public defender, was to know the competency laws and use them and train other people on them, to know the sanity laws and to train other people on them.
And can you, briefly kind of explain what the competency and insanity laws and how they play into the criminal defense
Sure.
system?
Sure. So there are 6 factors for competency. If somebody does not know those 6 factors, they're determined to be incompetent. So for example, if somebody can't tell you what, like, that it's an adversarial system. What does the defense attorney do? What's the state attorney do? If they don't understand the difference between guilty, not guilty, if they can't explain what they're charged with, if they can't assist the attorney in their defense, there's a chance they might be found incompetent. So if they're found incompetent, depending on the level of the charge, there's a certain time period that they have to either become competent, or if they're incompetent, then the case will be dismissed based on the fact that they're not competent. And if they're ever found competent in the future, the state attorney can always refile. Yeah. So sanity is more of a at the time of the offense. Competency is here and now. Do they understand? But sanity was at the time that the offense was committed. Did they understand right from wrong? Can they control their actions? Did they understand what they were doing?
Right. And I think, when we talk about competency, it's not always easy to identify, which is why you do need people who are very familiar with it. I mean, I remember when I was at the public defender's office as an attorney there, and I was handling a case. I think the person was like 19 years old, and he just seemed like a very nice, quiet individual. But as the longer you talk to him, we eventually figured out he wasn't competent. He didn't understand what was going on there. So I think a lot of times people kind of mask. They've come up with defenses to manage the world, but they don't really understand what's going on. In that case, one of his parents would always kind of interject or speak for him. And so, as a criminal defense attorney, you have to talk to your client and make sure they understand things. And eventually it was kind of determined he didn't.
Yeah.
But it is a tricky area.
It is. And there are also a lot of mentally ill clients are taught to parrot responses. Right. So they're taught to just repeat back exactly what I said. A lot of times when they're sent to the state hospital for training, they just teach them literally how to answer the questions and what phrases to use, and the clients come back and use it. So you have to know the right questions to ask. So, for example, instead of saying what's the nature of the adversary system, you might say, well, what does the public defender do? Well, what does that mean? What does the state attorney do? Okay, well, so you told me what they do. They prosecute people. What does that mean? Right. So you have to dig deeper and ask those, 5 more questions deeper to get to the bottom of, do they really understand or do they don't? Because it's not, can they parrot it back? It's, do they have an understanding of the process?
Right. So we're up against our last break of the hour, but you're listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM, AM 580. We'll be right back.
And I got hit so hard that it spun 180 degrees facing the way that was coming from. Every Friday morning I go and pick up bagels for my sons. It was raining that day, left-hand turn only lane, and just waiting for the arrow to turn green. Made it about 3/4 of the way up and just got hit from the side. Didn't see it coming. For a few moments I was just like, what had happened? I started to look around, saw that one of my windows was blown out. The airbags were out, and realized I was in a car accident. I was able to move my vehicle and get out, but then as soon as I got out, my neck was just in pain. We ended up going to my primary care doctor, went through the evaluation and all that, but the pain just wasn't going away. Luckily, it could have been a lot worse, but it still leaves me vulnerable to this day. I just remember a friend from the radio suggesting that I just call Mo. He picked up and talked to me. He was at a conference, I think, talked to me and set everything up for me. The process was awesome. Any questions that I ever had, it wouldn't even be a day that they would get back to me. They put me at ease when it came through the whole thing. The process was almost 2 years, but at the same time, I felt like I didn't have to worry about anything. I knew that they had everything under control. I would definitely recommend Just Call Mo. It was great working with them and having them work for me. Like I said, it took a lot of worry off. So yes, I would definitely recommend Just Call Mo. If you're injured on the go, just call Mo.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580 WDBO. I'm attorney Mo DeWitt, and this morning joining me is attorney Melissa Vickers, who's running for public defender in Orange and Osceola County. Melissa, again, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and speaking to our audience. The election is coming up at some point here. And obviously you are running for public defender. Can you tell people when the election is?
Yes. So the election for Office of the Public Defender will be In 2024, there will be a primary in August, and there will be a general election in November. So it's very important that everybody is registered to vote.
Absolutely.
Also, the rules have changed lately on your mail-in ballots.
That's true. That actually affected me, so
Yes.
I have to fix that for myself.
Yes, so everybody needs to go back. If you vote by mail, you have to go back and re-request your mail-in ballot. So
Right.
make sure everybody's doing that.
Yeah, because mine did not come, and I have to go do that. So
Right.
otherwise, I'll have to go down to the polling place, which nothing wrong with that.
No.
But just if you're expecting it to show up in the mail, it may not if you haven't
Correct.
done that. So
Right. Very important.
definitely be sure to do that. So, one of the things I like to do on this show is, a public defender is a public servant. I want to get to know your policies and, your experience and your background, which I think we've done. But I think it's also important for people to kind of know you as a person. So, I pose this question so that our audience can get to know you a little better. So, let's pretend we're way in the future. You're 80, 85 years old. You're gathered by your friends and family at some family event. Maybe it's a holiday, something along those lines. And they're all there to celebrate you. And they raise their glass and they toast you. What are 3 things that you would hope people would say about you at that age?
Okay. So first, I would love for them to say that I was an amazing wife and mother. I
course.
have twin boys currently who are in their freshman year of college.
Very nice.
So obviously they are my heart. My husband is amazing. So we have an amazing little family. And so that would be first and foremost. Second of all, I would hope that people would say that I cared and that I tried to do a good job. It's important to me. Work is very important to me. Aside from my personal life.
Yeah, no, I can tell that.
Work is I love what I do. Some people like to go to work and like what they do. I absolutely love what I do. And I want people to know that. And I want people to appreciate that and I'm very fortunate because not everybody gets that in their life. Some people
true.
they go to a job, they go home, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
I love what I do. Being the public defender has been a dream of mine for the last 17 years. So
I don't think there's any doubt you have an absolute passion for it.
yeah. So passion for work, and that I care. And then the third thing is that she was a kind person. I'm involved in lots of organizations. I like to be around people, and I just hope that people, remember me as being a kind human being on this earth.
And I think so far you're achieving that.
Thank you.
So, again, this is Attorney Melissa Vickers, who's running for public defender in Orange and Osceola County. The primary's in August, the actual election's in November, but please make sure that you go out and re-request those mail-in ballots if you're voting by mail. Otherwise, you'll have to go down to the polling place and vote in person. Melissa, again, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, a fantastic time. I know our audience enjoyed it. So again, thank you for joining us. And again, this is the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM, AM 580. We will see you next time.